I did it again. I played with my Game Boy, got lost in the game. Oh, Konami, Konami. Oops. Oh, I'm sorry. I know, I can't sing. Sorry. Yeah, Wiener. Yeah, well, that said, where was I? Oh, yes. Time for another solid Konami game for the Game Boy that was never released outside of Japan, Kav Noir. I have no idea why, because apart from the initial cutscene, which is very short, this one would have done great overseas. This game is what I would call a roguelike. So what is that? Well, in this case it means wandering through procedurally generated dungeons, descending floors in search of your mission's goals. Gameplay is turn-based and this is critical. In each turn the sequence is player move, player attack, and enemy move, and learning this sequence is critical to success. Attacks can only be made when you're directly adjacent to an enemy, and if you play your movements right, you can avoid attacks from the enemy as they can't attack you once they have moved. On any given stage, you'll start with a certain amount of health points, which on being attacked will reduce your health, and different enemies deal different damage levels. On reaching 0, you die, and you'll have to restart the stage from the beginning, which is generally called permadeath in roguelikes. There is a bit more to roguelike games, but I don't want to labour the description to the point that this becomes a dry list of mechanics. But the last thing I will mention is that Kav Noir wisely skips the hunger mechanic, which is where each movement increases your hunger level, and if you don't find replenishment, you can get to the point of starvation, and therefore again experience permadeath. Instead, with Kav Noir, you can play cat and mouse as much as you like without being stopped in your tracks. Now let's talk about why I think this is a great set of game. I see the Game Boy's game library as being marked by two distinct phases of game type. Gunpei Yokoi, who had earlier dreamt up the Game & Watch concept, brought that philosophy, and paired with the system's architect Satoru Okada winning the argument for interchangeable cartridges, many of the Game Boy's original games were endlessly playable, such as baseball, tennis, Solar Striker, golf, tennis and so forth. A tennis match may be eventually won, but a new one can be started just as easy and still have the fun factor, and Solar Striker, a shoot 'em up, endlessly loops. This is what I consider the first phase of Game Boy games that mimic the Game & Watch style of game. The second phase of Game Boy games could be defined as games that started pushing console level or near console gaming experiences with clearly defined end goals where the game comes to an end once it's completed. Kav Noir ends up straddling these two approaches beautifully. There is an end goal, clear the 4 main objectives to their highest difficulty, and then technically the game is over. But you can replay any of the stages any amount of times and still have fun because of the random nature of the dungeons. The placement of items does tend to follow a pattern eventually. For example, the third basement floor, you'll always find a shield upgrade during a certain stage, but its location is randomised, meaning each time you play, it's a little different. The fact that Kav Noir straddles this line is what makes it so special, because I have a ton of respect for those early Game Boy releases. Well, maybe not so much for Alleyway and Baseball, but outside of those two, the endless playability of, say, Kicks or Dr. Mario is emblematic of good game design. But sometimes a goal and a sense of progression is also great, and this game provides that as well. If a game gets this aspect right and the rest of it is well designed, plays well and is presented sufficiently well, you have a winner. This is what turns a good game into a great game. Sure, Konami's Tiny Toon platformers are nice on the Game Boy, well designed, but they'll never be great games. There is very little to do once you've completed the games apart from play the same thing back over again. But there is something else Kav Noir achieves. The fact that chunks of it can be tackled in a few minutes at a time, fitting into the Game Boy's usage profile perfectly. Konami got pretty much everything right about this game, crafting an experience that you will want to play through again and again. I can't bring myself to delete my save file, as there is only one save slot in this game, but as you can see, I have mastered all of the levels and still come back now and again to play through a level here and there. Okay, just a little flavour of the game's objectives. There are 4 objectives: defeat a certain number of monsters, collect a certain amount of gold, collect a certain amount of orbs, and the last, rescue a set amount of fairies. Each of these objectives is split into 9 missions plus a master level to cap it. Complete the master level on all 4 and you will have mastered the whole game. There are hidden rooms, teleporters, trapdoors, lava, and inventive enemy designs. And on top of this, you can level up your weapon, shield, defense, and attack statistics as well as luck. But that's not all. At the start of each stage, you'll be allocated 4 random power-ups such as health, poison antidotes, stat boosts, and more. And during the stage, you will find more of these, so there is an element of managing your 8 inventory slots as well. All of this makes for such a well-paced and highly memorable game with a really good soundtrack. The one that goes along with the gold coin dungeons is especially good. I think there is one reason Cave Noire has slipped under the radar. It was a Game Boy game. If Konami had released this on the Famicom back in, say, 1988, this would be one of the system's all-time classics. Instead, it slipped out on a Game Boy and only in Japan, meaning that for a long time the game's virtue has been overlooked. I honestly think that some Game Boy games don't get the respect that they deserve purely for being on the Game Boy. But there again, Konami did release their version of Rampart only in Japan for the Famicom the same year that Cave Noire was released, and that took a typically fine Atari arcade game and transformed it into another Konami tour de force that made the game amazing. Cave Noire fits that mould. This isn't to say it wasn't recognised in its time. After all, Famitsu in their cross review rated it as 29 out of 40, but it's fair to say that this has become one of the Game Boy's cult classics. In terms of roguelikes on the Game Boy, amazingly there is one that's even better than this, but it plays a little different and is a fair bit tougher, and we'll get to that one sooner rather than later. So let's rate this badass game. In terms of Japanese level, I rate it as beginner, as there is precious little Japanese in the game and you'll soon get used to what everything means as you play the game, with no Japanese knowledge at all. In the video description I have provided a link to a post that explains the Japanese that you'll encounter in this game if you don't understand any Japanese. As a game, it's great, or 4 stars out of 5 on my rating scheme. It's not an all-time great, but certainly past the upper echelon of Game Boy games. Highly recommended to anyone, and even if you don't have a Game Boy, play this on your Super Game Boy or via other means. It both complements and transcends its target system. In short, it's classic Konami. As always, like, subscribe and all of that shit, and also check out this rad Rubbish Heap merch, available worldwide on Redbubble and Amazon. See the links below for how to purchase. I've been Saki Endo, and this has been a Rubbish Heap. Ja ne ne!